Have you ever felt that inside your own head, there is someone controlling everything, dictating your fears, desires, and decisions? What if I told you that the voice you consider yours is not really you? Most people spend their entire lives believing the stories the mind tells, without realizing that they are trapped in an illusion that limits their freedom and awareness. In this video, we will unravel together the enigma of consciousness, discover who really speaks in your head, and how to start experiencing a mental freedom that few get to know. Get ready to question everything you believe about yourself and notice something that can transform the way you live every second. If topics like psychology, philosophy, and the darkness of the human soul interest you, subscribe now to the channel. Have you ever stopped to think about who this voice is that comments on everything inside your head? It wakes up with you, goes to sleep with you, and in the middle of the day, it seems like a sports commentator narrating every gesture you make. Curiously, it criticizes, praises, creates stories, but never stays silent. It is as if a noisy tenant lived in the silence of your mind. And the question is this voice really you? Imagine watching a movie, and suddenly someone starts explaining every scene out loud. At first it seems funny, but soon it becomes irritating. This is the function of this talking self that lives within us. It describes life as if it were a commentator, but we do not realize that we are watching the commentary, not reality itself. And out of confusion, we start to believe that we are the commentary. The most intriguing thing is that this voice has 1,000 masks. At one moment, it acts like an unforgiving judge, saying you were wrong. At another moment, like a cheerleader, shouting that you are a genius. Deep down, it is never satisfied. It always needs to give an opinion. And the most curious thing is that the more you believe it, the more imprisoned you become in this game of invisible criticism and applause. This inner voice feeds on everything you have ever experienced. Traumas, memories, fears, praises that marked your childhood, criticisms you never forgot. It mixes everything and creates a script that seems convincing. But if you observe closely, you will notice that it creates nothing new. It only recycles old stories. It is like a radio repeating the same songs over and over. Now, here is the big twist. What if this voice is not your true self? Think of it as being in a crowded cafe. The conversations, laughter, and noises are there, but what really matters is the taste of the coffee. The problem is that we live hypnotized by the noise and forget the essential. The coffee is you. The noises are just distractions. It is almost funny to notice how we treat this voice as if it were a wise entity. It speaks with such intimacy that we believe it is our best friend. But intimacy is not identity. The fact that a voice seems close does not mean it is true. It is like a video game character that gains its own life, but it is still only a creation. Perhaps you have already experienced that strange moment when everything goes silent for a second. Between one thought and another, it seems that something stops. In those moments, you are not judging or narrating anything, just existing. This silence is a window to something deeper, a self that does not speak, but observes. A self that has always been there, hidden behind the noise. And here arises the enigma that transforms everything. If this voice is not you, then who is listening? Who is this one who perceives the noise without mixing with it? This is the question that opens a portal to a completely new dimension of consciousness. And it is precisely at this point that we begin to see the next mystery, even more disconcerting. When you begin to observe this voice without fighting against it, something curious happens. It is like realizing that the noise of the street is not part of your house. The internal commentator continues speaking, but you no longer feel obliged to respond. At this moment, the mysterious figure of the observer emerges, silent, attentive, but never expressing an opinion. and it seems much more real than the shouting voice. This observer is not part of the mental conversation. It does not judge whether you are right or wrong, does not compare, does not praise. It only perceives. Imagine being in front of a storm, seeing lightning and thunder, but remaining dry, protected. This is the role of the observer within you, witnessing the chaos without being swallowed by it. A living silence that does not need words. Many confuse the internal commentator with this observer. But see, the commentator is noisy, agitated, always anxious to have the last word. The observer, on the contrary, is like an open sky that receives clouds without ever becoming one of them. It does not compete with thoughts, it only lets them pass. And it is in this contrast that true freedom begins to arise. A practical example. Imagine being stuck in traffic, impatient because you are late. The inner voice starts complaining, inventing 1,000 stories about your life, about how nothing works out. But if you distance yourself for a moment, you notice that there is someone just watching this mental agitation. This someone is not nervous, not late. It just sees. And then the weight of the moment diminishes. It is funny because we try to silence the mind by force, as if it were possible to tell the crowd of thoughts to be quiet. But the more we fight, the more noise appears. The secret is not to fight this voice, but to recognize that you are not it. When you stop fighting, the commentator naturally loses strength. And in the remaining silence, the observer appears. The experience is so simple that it is disconcerting. You realize that you do not need to build anything, nor conquer anything. The observer is not the result of practice, but something that has always been there, waiting to be noticed. It is like searching for your glasses throughout the house and suddenly realizing they were on your face all along. Simple like that, but deeply transformative. And at that moment, you discover a paradox. The observer has no form, but it shapes everything that happens. It does not cling to fear, but sees fear. It does not hold on to desire, but perceives desire. It does not try to erase sadness, but embraces it without confusing itself with it. It is like the cinema screen that is never affected by the movie projected on it. But there is an unsettling detail. If this silent observer exists, why do we get lost so much in the noise of the mind? Why do we believe more in criticism and praise than in this constant presence? This is the next key to the enigma, which reveals how our traumas, memories, and personal stories feed this illusion. Who is really speaking? Have you ever stopped to ask where these thoughts that seem to speak on their own in your mind come from? Many times, we believe they are ours. But do they really come from you? Or are they echoes of what we absorbed from the world around us? Imagine each idea as a wave that reaches your mental shore, some gentle, others overwhelming, but none born in isolation inside you. This perception changes the way we relate to each thought. It is curious to notice how many thoughts arise from memories, old experiences, or external influences. As if the mind had a kind of secret library, full of books we never asked to read, but that continue whispering ideas. When we recognize this, we begin to see that the mind is not a completely autonomous space, but a reflection of everything we have already experienced and absorbed, consciously or unconsciously. Have you ever caught yourself repeating thought patterns without understanding why? This happens because much of what we believe is rational is actually conditioning. It is as if we had a program running in the background of the system, dictating our reactions and opinions without us even realizing. Identifying these voices is the first step to not being controlled by them. And when that happens, a silent freedom begins to emerge. To illustrate, think of an internal dialogue before making an important decision. Many times, we hear criticisms, fears, and expectations that do not reflect our own truth, but rather external pressures or past judgments. It is as if we were being harassed by multiple invisible advisors, each with their own agenda. And here is the crucial point. Separating what is yours from what was imposed is a rare but transformative skill. Krishnamurti invites us to observe without interfering, without judging the origin of thoughts. It is different from trying to control them or suppress what arises. It is about realizing that there is an observer within you who can watch the thoughts without being carried away by them. Imagine a filmmaker watching scenes pass on the screen, curious and attentive, but without actively participating in the story. This perception changes everything. A practical exercise is simply to observe the flow of thoughts throughout the day without labeling them as good or bad. Notice the automatic phrases your mind creates, the fears, desires, and justifications that appear without warning. It is fascinating to notice how, by simply observing, many thoughts lose the power to dominate us. Gradually, this practice reveals who is really speaking inside your head, or rather shows that perhaps no one is speaking, and everything is projection. This discovery is unsettling, of course, because it confronts us with the reality that the mind is full of noise that does not always belong to us. But it is precisely this confrontation that begins the process of inner freedom. When we realize we are spectators and not authors of every thought, a clarity emerges that once seemed impossible. It is like waking up from a collective dream and seeing the world with different eyes. And the beauty of this understanding is that it does not require struggle or effort. On the contrary, it requires attention, presence, and honesty with yourself. And it is at this point that the mind begins to reveal itself truly, showing not only the thoughts, but the patterns and fears that have silently guided our lives until now. And when this awareness awakens, the door to the next level, perceiving the relationship between mind, time, and consciousness, begins to slowly open. When the mind creates identity, how many times have you noticed the mind trying to define who you are? Every thought, emotion, or memory seems to shout, "This is me." But is this identity real or just a construction of the mind? It is as if we were wearing several masks without even noticing, each representing an expectation, an experience, or a fear that accompanies us. And without realizing it, we blindly believe in these versions of ourselves. The self we believe we are is actually trapped in past experiences and comparisons with others. Our mind creates a continuous character that tries to justify everything, from our decisions to our fears. It is as if each memory were a brick, building a house we call identity, without ever questioning if we want to live there. Recognizing this is frightening, but liberating. Many times, this identity presents itself as control, as if it were the anchor that keeps us safe. But ironically, it is what limits us. When we realize that the mind projects the sense of self at every moment, we begin to notice that we are trapped in a narrative we never consciously wrote. It is like watching a movie in which we are protagonists without ever having written the script. A practical example of this appears in constant comparisons with others. The mind points out differences, highlights flaws, and creates standards of success or failure. But this identity, which seems so solid, is completely dependent on these external references. Realizing that we are more than what we think or how we see ourselves is the first step to dissolving this illusion. Krishnamurti challenges us by suggesting that this sense of self is one of the greatest prisons of the mind. Every automatic reaction, every defense, every judgment arises from this illusory construction. When we begin to observe without identifying with it, we realize that the true observer within us is not tied to these masks. And it is precisely there that freedom begins to insinuate itself. To practice this, try observing moments when your mind reacts automatically. Anger, envy, pride. Ask yourself, who is feeling this? Is this me or just a memory of past experiences guiding me? Simply paying attention to this process already begins to dissolve the rigidity of the self and open space for a deeper, less conditioned awareness. The irony is that the more we try to define and control this identity, the more it slips away. It is like trying to catch water with your hands. The more force we apply, the more it slips through. And it is precisely in this disarming that the enigma of consciousness is revealed, realizing that the mind is a constant flow, and that true observation does not require active participation of the manufactured self. And it is at this point that we realize that consciousness belongs to no one. It simply exists, flowing, observing, without name, without identity. And when we allow ourselves to contemplate this reality, we begin to understand that what we believe to be I is merely a temporary narrative, while something greater observes us in silence. And it is precisely this perception that leads us to the next mystery: the relationship between thought, time, and presence. The mind as a spectator. Imagine being able to observe your mind as if you were a spectator in a theater, watching the scenes unfold without interfering. Each thought, emotion, or reaction appears on stage, but you do not need to act or judge. This practice is not about control or strict discipline, but about pure and curious attention, like someone watching an intriguing series without knowing the next episode. Many times we confuse the act of thinking with being dominated by thought. But when the mind becomes a spectator, it begins to notice patterns that previously went unnoticed. It is like watching a repeated movie and noticing details that were never perceived. Each nuance, each hidden motivation, each silent impulse. And this changes the relationship we have with ourselves. Krishnamurti suggests that the key is to observe without interference, without the desire to change or control what arises. It is simply seeing what is, as if we were facing a landscape. Some parts beautiful, others dark, but all real. And the more we practice this, the more the mind loses the habit of reacting automatically, opening space for clarity and perception. A daily example of this is during a difficult conversation. Instead of reacting impulsively or letting defensive thoughts dominate, you simply observe what arises internally: fear, anger, insecurity. Noticing these thoughts without engaging gives us the freedom to choose if, when, and how to act, instead of being dragged by automatic patterns. This practice also reveals that many of the thoughts that bother us are just mental noise, echoes of the past, or anxieties about the future. By observing without judgment, we begin to notice that the mind has its own rhythm, but it does not need to control us. It is like noticing the wind blowing, but it is not necessary to fight against it. We can simply feel its presence. To practice, set aside a few minutes each day to simply sit and observe the flow of thoughts, without trying to interrupt or change them. Mentally note what arises and notice repetitive patterns. Over time, you will begin to notice that there is a space between the arising of a thought and the reaction to it, and in that space lies true freedom. It is fascinating how this silent attention even transforms moments of stress. When we observe the mind without identifying with each thought, emotions that were once intense begin to lose weight, like clouds passing in the sky. And in this process, we realize that we are not our thoughts, but the observer who perceives them with clarity and depth. And it is at this point that new questions arise. If we can observe the mind without being consumed by it, who are we really? What exists beyond the constructions of the self and the thoughts that define us? This investigation leads us directly to the next mystery, which explores the relationship between thought, time, and true presence. How the mind clings to the past and future. Have you noticed how much of the mind is constantly trapped in memories of the past or worries about the future? It is as if we are always revisiting scenes from an old movie or anticipating sequences that do not even exist yet. This imprisonment to time makes the mind never truly present, and it is precisely there that suffering begins to silently creep in. The past creates patterns, memories, and traumas that shape how we react today. Each old experience is like a ghost whispering instructions, fears, and justifications. And the future? It arises as an expectation, a desire, or a fear that keeps us on constant alert. Between past and future, the mind rarely finds the present, and it is in this misalignment that we lose contact with reality. Krishnamurti invites us to perceive this dynamic without judgment. He points out that as long as the mind is trapped in memories or projections, we will never know true freedom. It is as if we were running after shadows, believing they are real, while what is in front of us remains ignored. Recognizing this illusion is the first step to transcending mental time. A daily example: when someone hurts us, the thought quickly travels to past situations, repeating the suffering or projects imagined future conflicts. At that moment, the mind acts like a river carrying leaves far away, never content with what is happening now. Noticing this tendency is the beginning of a silent but profound change. Continuous observation of thought reveals that it is never static. It is always trying to connect past and future, constructing a narrative that reinforces the self. It is as if the mind fears the emptiness of the present, seeking to fill it with stories, justifications, and expectations. And the more we notice this, the closer we get to a state of pure attention, without intermediaries. To train this perception, a simple practice is to bring attention to the present moment, breathing, bodily sensations, sounds around you. Whenever the mind tries to escape to the past or future, simply observe without resistance. Over time, this attention reveals that the mind can be fluid, without the need to cling to memories or anxieties, opening space for clarity. It is impressive to notice how, by reducing this dependence on time, an inner silence emerges that once seemed impossible. This silence is not emptiness, but an intense presence, where thoughts exist without dominating us. And it is in this space that we begin to experience consciousness without the distortions of past and future, a fertile ground for true understanding. And it is precisely in this silence that the next step is revealed. Understanding that the mind is not consciousness, that thoughts do not define the being, and that there is a presence that observes everything without getting involved. This perception leads us directly to the next topic, where we will explore the essence of attention and presence without distraction. Perceiving without interfering. Have you ever felt the difference between thinking about something and simply perceiving something happening? Conscious presence is exactly that. A state in which you observe without interfering, without judging, without trying to control. It is like sitting by a lake, watching the water move without stirring a drop, simply perceiving the flow of life inside and outside you. When we connect with this presence, we begin to notice that many thoughts arise automatically, but they do not define us. It is fascinating to realize that we can experience intense emotions and complex ideas without being carried away by them. This feeling is liberating because it reveals that there is an inner space where we can simply exist without needing to justify anything. Krishnamurti challenges us to observe without filters, to perceive life as it is, without the distortions of the conditioned mind. Imagine watching a work of art without searching for meanings or messages, simply contemplating its colors and shapes. It is in this attitude of pure attention that the mind finds rest and clarity, and the illusory self begins to lose its rigidity. A daily example: when listening to music that evokes emotions, you can simply feel without analyzing or comparing with past experiences. By practicing this with thoughts and emotions, we realize that much of suffering arises from our tendency to interfere, judge, or resist. Simple observation transforms the experience into something profound and revealing. The practice of presence does not require heroic effort. It only requires sincerity and curiosity. The more we observe, the more we become aware of mental patterns and automatic reactions without being swallowed by them. It is like turning on a light in a dark room and noticing everything clearly, without moving a single piece of furniture, simply seeing what was always there. Over time, conscious presence allows us to interact with the world differently. Impulsive reactions decrease, judgments lose weight, and decisions arise with greater clarity. It is as if an internal focus lens is placed over our lives, revealing previously invisible details, showing that there is a silent freedom beyond the incessant activity of the mind. This freedom, however, is not something acquired linearly. It appears in moments when the mind quiets down, when we realize that observing is different from controlling. And it is precisely in this state that the capacity to feel the world more authentically, more intensely, and more connected emerges, without the distortions of ego or compulsive thinking. And it is at this point that we approach the last mystery, understanding that the mind is an instrument, not the owner of the observer, and that consciousness awakens when we stop identifying with thoughts and emotions. This perception leads us directly to the final topic, where we will explore integrating all of this into our daily experience. Living awakened consciousness. When we begin to realize that the mind is only a flow of thoughts and that there is a conscious observer within us, something changes in daily experience. Every action, every decision, every dialogue begins to be filtered by this silent attention. It is like waking from a prolonged dream and realizing that life is not just what the mind tells us, but what we can truly experience with clarity. Integrating this consciousness does not mean suppressing thoughts or emotions, but allowing them to arise and pass without defining us. Imagine yourself as a river. The water flows, but you remain on the shore, witnessing the movement without being carried away. This practice brings a deep sense of freedom, where the mind does not dictate the rules and the present becomes tangible and vivid. Krishnamurti reminds us that this integration requires honesty and constant observation. Every moment is an opportunity to notice old patterns, automatic reactions, and identifications with the illusory self. And the more attentive we are, the clearer it becomes that suffering arises from attachment to the mind, while freedom emerges from the simple perception of what is. A daily example. In an argument, instead of reacting automatically, you observe the thoughts arising and, from this observation, choose to respond consciously. This transforms interactions, relationships, and even personal decisions, showing that awakened consciousness is not an abstract concept, but something applicable and powerful in everyday life. This practice also reflects in creativity and problem solving. When the mind is not dominated by patterns and judgments, new ideas arise naturally, as if they had been quietly waiting to be noticed. It is in this space of pure attention that we perceive solutions that previously seemed invisible or impossible. Another interesting point is how integrating consciousness changes our perception of time. The past no longer has control over us. The future loses the weight of anxiety, and each present moment becomes full, intense, and alive. It is like learning to savor each sip of a rare drink. Instead of swallowing quickly and losing the flavor, life becomes a sensory and conscious experience. The daily practice of observation and silent presence creates an internal continuity. It is not about sporadic moments of perception, but a gradual transformation where the mind ceases to be a prison and becomes an ally. This integration allows us to live with authenticity, discernment, and freedom, even amidst the chaos of daily life. And in the end, we realize that awakened consciousness is not something to be conquered, but something that reveals itself. The mind continues to flow, but the observer remains attentive, present, and whole. And it is precisely this understanding that concludes our journey through the enigmas of consciousness, opening the door for each viewer to experience this presence in their own life. So, what did you think of exploring the enigma of your own consciousness? Were you able to realize how many thoughts you believed were yours actually do not belong to you, I want to know in the comments, which other thinker or character do you want me to analyze in the next video, so we can dive into their mind and understand their ideas deeply. Do not forget to subscribe to the channel and activate notifications to continue learning and expanding your consciousness with us. Each video is one more step to unravel the mind and live with more clarity and presence. These 2 videos in front of you are not here by chance. And if everything you believe about yourself is merely a reflection of someone else's gaze, click now on one of the videos beside you and start breaking this mirror. You will have to risk clicking. So, which one will you choose?